Strong Enough merch is now available. Go to strongenoughpod.com and check out all the stuff that you can get so that you'll have those daily reminders that you are strong enough, you are worth it. Welcome to the Strong Enough Podcast, where we talk about the challenges and celebrate the triumphs of people just like you. I'm your host, Claudia. Today's guest is going to talk about energy and trauma. She's going to share why past trauma can affect our current decision making even when we don't recognize it. She's also going to share how our energy can make us better both mentally and physically. Please help me welcome Dr. Alison J. K. Dr. Alison, how are you today?
Hey, Claudia, I'm good. How about you?
I am well, and no matter when people listen to this, I want them to know we are recording this during this ridiculously chilly weather all across the country, and we are both in cute little hoodies.
Yeah, and I'm in Florida on the West Coast.
Wow, Florida and a hoodie. So it's like 55 there. That's chilly to you, right?
Freezing to us, yeah. Yeah, I grew up in Boston, and I have never lived in such a cold climate ever since then. I've been increasingly, since my college, moving into more and more tropical climates, as you'll hear. So, yeah.
So what's next? I mean, where is going to be more tropical for you than Florida? Give us a little teaser.
Central America tends to be, or I could go back to Southeast Asia.
Nice. Okay. Well, that was a teaser because you just named some cool places there. So I would love it if you would tell the audience a little about yourself.
All right. So I feel like what will serve you all the most to know in my honestly really fun story of what's been my life so far is let me back up just a tiny bit more. My mom in my teen years at some point said to me, Allison, I think that you're really naturally good with understanding people. You might want to consider psychology. She and I were really close. She tended to be pretty intuitive, which I didn't realize till later. Um, and so I sat with that and I did it. It felt right. And the third semester in, I was horrified because I was like, you're not teaching me how to be the happiest, most thriving version of myself and how to help others. You're showing me about the hardwiring of the brain. You're showing me how to use it for HR and capitalistic purposes and industrial management. You're trying to prove yourselves as a hard science. You're not answering that. So I've spent basically since college, sophomore year, looking for that. How do we be the happiest, most thriving versions of ourselves? And it wasn't because I was struggling. It was because I genuinely have always had this woohoo celebration about like, I'm here, I'm on planet Earth, I'm in a body, let's do this, and aware increasingly is, I've seen the contrast of those who do not feel that way, that it's a bit rare. And so, yeah, eventually I picked up energy medicine modalities, 5 of them. I'm skipping a whole bunch of my story, but when I was a classroom teacher for 2.5 years using my bachelor's, which ultimately was in English Lit, 2.5 years into it, I wasn't pleased with what my money was. I was not okay with being caged, what felt like a cage for like 3+ decades of my life. I knew there was more abundance available. I knew I wanted more adventure. And then at the same time, around that same time period, if not even the same Saturday, I was in like sessions. So this was my side gig to the classroom teaching. I was teaching meditation, which I had learned years before, to in a local community center to adults and to the students in an after-school club at the middle school I was teaching at, and then running energy medicine, health and wellness sessions alongside. And I was in like session 4 of a package of like 10, and both myself and the client were really super stoked about the results we were getting. And I looked up at the ceiling with my hands over abdomen area, and I'm like, well, okay, so how do I get even more or greater results for my clients than this? And so within a month's time, those 2 questions, the awareness of this isn't okay, this level of money, this lack of adventure, this lack of fun and joy and ease, and how do I get even more robust results for my clients, coalesced. And so colleague brought in the international school system to my awareness. Did what I had to do, submitted resume, flew to where I had to, where international school heads flew in from all over the world. Candidates like myself flew in from all over, and they were in a hotel. So I did a bunch of different job interviews in all these different hotel rooms. It was the most bizarre way to interview for a job. Really, like at one point, sitting on the edge of a bed with a school or a head of a school, like in another part of the planet. So anyway, I got a bunch of job offers by the end of the weekend, and chose Taiwan because I knew that being the small democratic nation south of mainland China, it was able to practice the more traditional Taoist and Chinese philosophies. So Taoism, Tao ism, created the yin yang, which everybody knows.
Mhm.
Probably have some of you probably have the tat of the yin yang, and acupuncture and qigong come from it. I'm also a teacher of qigong, also a teacher of yoga, trained in India. Um, so yeah, I went there to. I'm just assessing what will help you guys the most. So in my decade, I lived there for 10 years, and I was a teacher and an administrator, and actually asked to revisit my psych background and ended up teaching AP Psych because they were kids that were tracked for Ivy Leagues back in America using the American curriculum that we were teaching, as well as teaching English Lit. And so, blah, 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 still running energy medicine sessions alongside to local expats or local Chinese or fellow expats, I mean to say. And had gotten my master's, which I totally skipped over in the States before I went to Taiwan, and ended up working on my PhD. And as I was starting what was I thought the dissertation, I wrote my first book, What If There's Nothing Wrong? In my ninth and in my 10th year there. My PhD was my ninth and 10th year there. So I would go to work and do what I had to do, go to the gym after work, and then like late night drive my scooter down to the traditional Chinese tea house and sit on the floor with the cushions and have that low table. And I do my work on the low table, drinking tea, big jugs of Baishang Li Cha. That's Chinese for passion fruit green tea. Like I'm talking big jugs all night long. And so my first book was What If There's Nothing Wrong? And what I realized from all of my understanding after visiting monasteries and talking to monks, like there was a great running trail I'd go to on Saturdays behind monastery where I lived in the city that I lived in. And I ended up going to the monastery frequently. And I was really surprised to learn that the classroom, I thought I expected a lot more rooms to be dedicated to meditation. It was only one hall, and the rest were classrooms where they would dialogue about the nature of the mind. So Buddha took out the 5 limbs of yoga. There's 8 limbs to yoga. Only one is the body postures. 5 of them are about how to deal with the mind and consciousness. So Buddha took that aspect out of yoga and then traveled up north to Tibet, over China, Japan, down to Southeast Asia. So there's different branches of Buddhism for the local cultures with the basic tenet: every human mind is neurotic. Here, with the 5,000 years of tools, here are the tools with which to work with your own particular flavor of neuroses. So then I would also go for Tuina massages, typical or traditional Chinese massages, and I'd go for reflexology, and I'd ask questions about how energy flowed. And I was continuing my work of meditation as well as the certification in India as a yoga and meditation teacher formally, because I had already been teaching meditation for over a decade. And I began to understand consciousness more. And when I revisited in that teaching of psychology courses, I started to integrate even more now the West and the Eastern's view of the mind and how it works, and consciousness and how it works. So all of that in the writing of my first book, What If There's Nothing Wrong, I realized as I came back to the States, oh my God, man, if we in the West understood how subtle energy works and how consciousness works, and we valued it, we would have so much less suffering and so much more thriving. And so that's my mission basically, is to turn people onto that, and not teaching it only, but running the energy medicine clearings and activations so people can feel how much different they can feel, because the choices that we make on a daily basis aren't from the parts of our mind that we can hear the thoughts of. So trauma, for example, is carried in the subconscious. And we make a lot of over 85% of the stats. The official stats, I say it's more like 95% from everything I've seen in the decades of doing this work. Of our daily choices, people are typically making from thoughts that they don't even hear. So it's from the subconscious and unconscious that are making our choices and making our days be the way they are and stay the same and not let go of trauma. So trauma has its own unique dynamics to it, but it can be cleared. I do it day in and day out. And I just would love for people to understand that your mind is something to be observed. It's not something to listen to all the time. And then I, help people shift into that so they can have more detachment from the thoughts that depress them. And I clear out the trauma that is a certain type of energetic container that causes you to think a certain way, have a certain typical train of thought that becomes your habitual train of thought and habitual choices and behaviors, therefore. And it gets carried in the body too. So clearing it up and out is what I do so that you can then access something different and beyond the trauma.
I love so much of what you just said, and there are a million questions that I could ask
Yeah.
right now. I'm going to start though with energy. So I think we've all had a moment, at least one moment, where we've felt, oh, the energy in here is bad or negative, or that vibe was really good. Why do you think we culturally or as a society here in the US have those fleeting moments, but refuse to acknowledge what a big thing energy is and how big a part of our life it is and should be, and how we could be so much better if we would acknowledge that and work with it?
That's such a great question. Um, Lots comes in as the response. So it's our conditioning, it's our patriarchal society that we've been under for centuries in the West, not just America. I mean, you could read a book called like Women in Madness. There's been a suppression of women's access to their intuitive voice for centuries because that's where a hell of a lot of our power is for both men and women. And it brings in the new. And there were controlling mechanisms. I actually ended up tracing back to this, Claudia and listeners. I was surprised by this when I was writing my first book, to basically when we came out of the medieval days and church and science split responsibility for aspects of society. So science got busy proving what they talked about in the Bible, and the church took over dealing with the invisible. And all our ancient wisdom via the mystery schools or via the alchemists went underground into mystery schools in the West. So we learn to distrust anything we can't see or prove, point to physically. So, and we also have, particularly in America, this sense to prove ourselves right from when we broke free of the crown. That we can come up with our own textiles, we can come up with our own industries. We don't need your freaking tea, man. You're not going to give us the taxes for it because we don't have representation, right? So we've been busy proving ourselves in America, and that really hasn't died down. So there is a sense of it is some of the best parts of being American. We're not just dreamy. We implement, we take action steps, and we quote unquote make things happen. But we're too out of balance with that. That's all yang energy. If you think of yin and yang, feminine, masculine within each of us, yin is more going within, listening to your intuitive guidance, having the space to hear beyond just your daily thoughts as you're going about your daily life. So you can hear the whispers that bring in the guidance, which are quieter than the loud shouting mind of the repetitive thoughts. And then the yang, which is the action. So we tend to rely on what we can prove here, our measures of success here for the external. How big is your house? How many kids do you have? What kind of car do you drive? What kind of clothes do you wear? And it's very convenient for the lazy ego mind, which is what we call it in Buddhism. So it's a part of ourselves that's attached to our personality level self, ego mind. And yeah, so in the East, I know that what I learned was with all these different places I went, whether it was in Taiwan or during Chinese New Year break, between the semesters I traveled all throughout Southeast Asia, there were tons of these massive statues of Buddha. I mean, if you just think of a social media meme of Buddha, automatically, what does that connotate? But peace,
Hmm.
right? But there, from my perspective, going there already as a person who is a meditator and teaching meditation and running energy medicine sessions, I would see monks in the morning at market in their robes hop onto their scooters and drive away with their bags of veggies and produce that I was there to get. I'd be in Bangkok on break, and I'd see a monk standing in the metro smoking a cigarette with a cell phone in his hand, and I was like, I didn't know they could do that, and statues of Buddha everywhere. I'd fill up my gas in my scooter, and right behind was this like 8-story high Guan Yin statue everywhere, and this gave me the reminder of your power is within you. Go within. So that valuing that happens and that permeates it over there. We are more like stay on the surface. I also think that in the West, due to like the biggest book in our medical system is the list of psychological diagnoses, and it's
Mhm.
growing all the time. It's is there something the little pinky has a problem with? Okay, let's list a new diagnosis. Um, so we're focused on what if everything's wrong. The opposite of the title of my first book, What If There's Nothing Wrong, which has many meanings. And so this problem focus, this is a lot because we are geared towards this surface. I'm not saying we're superficial at all, but we are geared more towards the surface. I mean, there's still the discomfort many people have when they hear the word deep. Well, you're really deep, man, you know? And yet skating along the surface makes us stay focused on our targets, our 5 steps to achieving that goal, our goals that we hear our mind come up with, and achievement. And all of that busyness and actioning to achieve keeps us in that yang state and in that imbalanced state. Um, but we're in different times now. I'm going to take a different turn. Are you ready for me to talk more? Or you want to ask another question?
I would love for you to keep going. This is amazing.
All right, cool. All right. When I got back, 2011, a year back, my worst culture shock was coming back to my home country, by the way. Voice America approached me and asked me to do a radio show weekly, and it was about the Mayan galactic alignment on 12/21/2012. I wasn't doing anything in my business, public facing about this whatsoever. I had no idea why they were reaching out to me for this request. I had been taking people because I'm on the west coast of Florida, like I said, so it's just a hop, skip, and a jump, an hour flight across the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm in the Yucatan, where a lot of the Mayan ruins are. So I had been taking some clients on VIP trips and retreats there. And I said to Voice America, okay, give me 48 hours. I'm going to tune in and listen and see. And called him back and said yes. And had a weekly radio show interviewing experts about, okay, what is this December 21st, 2012 thing? And what I came to understand is it's not only the Mayans who understood it was the end of a 26,000-year era. And I mean, and I had gone to the observatory at the Chichen Itza site
Mhm.
where they had come up with the calendar. And it's a massively intriguing blend of astronomy, astrology, mathematics, and ancient wisdom and spirituality. It's phenomenal. And they're not the only culture to have done this. Yogi Bhajan in the yogic culture, he talks about 2012 having been the end of one yuga, which in Sanskrit means era, and the beginning of a new yuga. Professional astrologers talk about the ending of the age of Pisces, and we've moved into the age of Aquarius. That's just a brief list of a really long list of loads of people who've had that prophecy throughout history of 2012 being a marker year. What I came to understand was it's a 20-year window of our greatest evolutionary leap ever. And because my mission has become what it's become, my publisher made me include that in a super long subtitle of my second book, Vibrational Upgrade, A Conspiracy for Your Bliss, Easing Humanity's Evolutionary Transition. Oh, here's one right here. So, easing humanity's evolutionary transition.
Do you have that entire title memorized?
Yeah, I think I just did it. That's one of the few. I don't have it memorized for the other books, the subtitles. No, I do have for my latest one. Anyway, that was a good question. Fun. Um, I bring all of this up because we're in a time where everything's spiritualizing because we're in humanity's spiritual awakening times. So before COVID, you saw more yoga studios. Before COVID, did you not see more meditation apps? So then also think about now we have skin detergents for sensitive skin. There's also people more sensitive to bacteria. We came out when I came back to the States, I was really mildly horrified with how big the antibacterial thing was, and that was in 2010, right before um, the window had started to open for things to change for 2012. There were a fair amount of people that had crises, multiple crises in 2010, like job loss, somebody they loved dying, and maybe a health diagnosis to shake them up out of there every day to get them ready ahead of time for what was coming in 2012. And there's been waves of people awakening. So like in 2014, there was a whole new, 2016, a whole other group. COVID caused a whole nother group, which in fact may be why it hung around for so long, because we needed more people to stop listening to the depressive parts of themselves and get uplifted and awaken. Everything's awakening. The skin's awakening. Our senses are awakening because it's this humanity spiritual awakening time. So the first 10 years that we're just completing have been about cleansing and purging, as we've seen. And like Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement, where there's been abuses of power, truth lie comes to the surface where there's been lies, rebalancing of the masculine and the feminine, rebalancing of material and spiritual, and so much more. And so the systems that were out of balance or abusing their power, for example, or out of alignment with what's right and what's good, or the heart or the divine, as we could say in other terms, collapsed. So we're seeing the polarity in our Congress, for example, and in our politics, and we're not the only country that's having this polarization, because it's like a fever peaking before it breaks, before we get to unity. So you may have had increasing crisis in your life, and whether that's trauma making itself much more clear to itself, you're having a harder time moving forward, you're more stuck. It's because we are meant to evolve beyond that old heaviness in these times.
What do you think keeps a lot of us more stuck in that trauma? So earlier you talked about how a lot of the decisions that we make are listening to, a voice inside of us that's way deep down and is really responding to a traumatic experience or event that we went through. How do we recognize that and then work to break that cycle?
Okay, there's a lot there. That's a great question. And I do want to say that the second half of these times now is where we all recognize our own power is in our power to choose. And that means whether we feel victim to a storyline inside of ourselves, like what you just asked about, that I'm about to go into, or our socioeconomic status and blaming that for our lack of money, or our gender and blaming that for our lack of success, or anything outside of us, even if they're completely rational, logical arguments that you can point to and say, yes, that did happen in the history of my race or my gender or blah blah blah. We are rising out of victim state into we each have the power to choose. We have to recognize we're creating our reality from those choices. And so what I'm up to is clearing out what I call the back of the house consciousness, the subconscious and unconscious, to flush more vital life force energy or consciousness to the frontal lobe, so you can make more conscious choices and take your peripheral blinders off and see more possibilities and actually bring in the new. So it starts with recognizing from the teachings of meditation that, which I already said, every human mind is neurotic. Here's tools to work with your own particular flavor. And that it's highly likely that you set this up with I'm going to get a little bit abstract here. It seems like from all the research I've done, including like giving pop quizzes to my students for extra credit to do some of the research stuff I wanted to know when I taught at the international school, it seems like we work with ascended masters or top level guides before we incarnate. And there's a concept in the yogic culture in Sanskrit called samskaras. So we look at how our soul has evolved over our lifetimes, and we look at where it still needs evolution. And so we pick 2 or 3 key points, and then we decide on what type of family, what type of society, what country to be born into that would set the drama or set the stage up for us to be in that drama, so that we're in that point that we will end up evolving beyond that soul level lesson, so we don't have to repeat it. So on some level, you chose this trauma, as much as that annoys the heck out of you to hear. At some point, this trauma is here as a gem for you to move beyond, no matter how disgusting, how painful, how outrageously wrong that trauma was. I hear you on all of it. I really do. I've heard it all. The point being is that continuing to blame that outside source keeps you stuck. And continuing to feel that sense of righteous indignation keeps you stuck. And you have storylines based on how trauma seeds. You hear storylines that want to justify and rationalize why you're not moving forward. So when we feel trauma, it's traumatizing. We can't handle it consciously, so it goes into the subconscious. And it sits there and it has an energy. And as you said, uh, about why aren't we prioritizing energy, realizing how important it is. Energy is our first language. Exactly the way you described. We walk into a room and we can feel this good vibes or bad vibes. It's our first language. So that trauma sits back there and it corresponds to like part of your body feeling heavy, but you don't hear its thoughts, but it breeds a certain line of thinking. So when I'm doing clearings in energy medicine, I will say traumas and their ensuing free floating thoughts. Because the job of the ego mind, where we hear our thoughts, it's put into our mind body spirit system by the creator to keep us protected, to help us navigate the physical plane, because there's just so much stuff really going on beyond what our eyes and five senses can pick up. So from the days of being in jungles, lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, and we would either have to fight or go into flight, our adrenal cortex, right? That wiring is the ego mind in trauma. So once you've been traumatized, the ego mind has not just a tendency, but the mechanism kick into place of, oh my God, that was a lot of suffering. So this is what does happen. You do here is, I need to keep you safe. So people with trauma resist change even more because anything new, anything presenting the unknown, is that mechanism gets kicked into gear even more from the free floating thoughts above the trauma of, oh my God, must keep safe, must keep safe. There's a sense of looping too with trauma. And I can get into that in a minute, but do you have any questions so far?
Well, I find it very interesting what you're talking about, and it makes me think about people who say are in an abusive relationship. And so
Do
they know that they're in this situation, they know it's a bad situation, but it's easier for them or more comfortable to stay in that situation versus
yeah.
work to move past it. And it sounds like, that's what you're talking about is inside our brains, and our brain is trying to help us, but by doing that, it's kind of keeping us sometimes stuck in a place where we shouldn't be.
Yeah, and it's great reiteration for your audience. Thank you. I know that I want to help people understand you can move beyond it. And the reason why I went into that wasn't to devastate you, it was to help you see the inherent resistance within your system and to not get down on yourself because you haven't changed it yet, and to not get depressed because it hasn't changed yet. It's a challenge. And so we're talking through it. And that was just the first setting or the first step. So now that you understand the better context that trauma breeds, I'm going to go this direction. It's interesting. I had a woman in France, for example, go to the bank and do a bank transfer physically so that her husband wouldn't see that she was working with me in order to leave him, to get up the courage to leave him. And he wasn't even abusive physically. Um, so I've done this dance a lot. And what I've seen is like I have needed to do increasing energy medicine clearings, and what my hand is doing, for those of you who are on video, it's moving in this forward moving pace. So I've had to be like a snowplow gathering snow with the clearings in energy medicine to continue to clear out the layers of the trauma and the subsidiary thoughts that got created because of the trauma, like those protective ones I was just talking about. And they accumulate, but the person has typically needed such support along the way to come out of that trauma and thinking that you're saying. And it's totally possible. I've done it many times. And you have to stay at it, and you want to work with. So what are you saying, Dr. Allison? Should I go get Reiki? Should I go get energy medicine? I don't know, because I know that when I've seen other Reiki professionals, the light, and even that's my first modality, and I train people in it, and it's a very clear lineage. I'm six removed from the founder of Reiki, for God's sakes, and it's beautiful, and there's unconditional loving energy in it. So if you need some of that unconditional loving energy to remind you of your value and your worth, and things aren't so bad, and you're not what that abusive person says about you, Reiki is a good way to go. But I have created the vibrational upgrade system because I have found that people shift more quickly and easily, not just from meditation, not just from Reiki, but from the combination of energy medicine and my yoga and meditation teacher background. Because once there's a shift, once I've cleared out the trauma energetically, you still have the mind's momentum to think that way. So then I do more clearings to help you come off of that habituated, entrenched path that your mind easily goes down for that same thought pattern. I think that's the snowplow metaphor,
Mhm.
to take you off of that track and recondition you towards a new track, away from the trauma and a traumatizing situation. So it takes a while to shift off and over to the other sides. And first thing is to work with somebody who's effective, like myself, or if you listen to somebody else do energy medicine. I'm not saying coach. I'm saying do energy medicine, and you notice that you feel lighter and more open, then that's a sign that they're a good person to work with. If you're not going to work with me, because this isn't about marketing, it's about you understanding, get help, because you're not going to pull yourself out of trauma alone. End of discussion, honestly. And I don't mean to talk like that. It sounds obnoxious to my own ears, but really I hope it delivered the point effectively.
I hope so too, because I think, that is how a lot of people often try to heal
Sure.
themselves. Maybe they're embarrassed because of what they went through, or they feel like they just
Yeah.
can't trust anybody because of what they've gone through. And so they
Yeah.
say, well, I'm just going to go it alone. I don't trust a therapist, or I don't trust a coach. So when you're
Yeah.
in that space and you're working with somebody and doing vibrational upgrade, what kind of time frame are we looking at? How long is it going to take somebody to really get past that trauma, or get through it, I would say, and kind of rewire and change the direction of the snowplow?
Fully, substantially living a new life, about 2 years. Moving forward in their new life with positivity happening and getting created all the time, every day. Probably 6 months to a year to really get. It depends on the trauma, the nature of it, and how deep it is, and how many times it repeated. Honestly, so 6 months could be. I've removed traumas in one call, but to get the person to start making new and different choices, that second step is responsible, and that's what takes the time, and me doing continued clearing. So I would say 6 months to really get, like, the shovel down to the bottom of the pile of snow and out, to get the trauma out, to get tracked and living your new life, up to 2 years.
Do you work in conjunction with therapy or medication, or do you feel like what you do is an entirely separate entity and somebody can come to you and work through that trauma and be good?
Such a great question. It's so effective. A lot of the times I have had a lot of women who, and men who have worked with this happen. No, it's men too. They'll say they're in their second year of working with me, and it's in my mastermind program. So my signature program is magic, manifestation, and money flow. Sounds like it's all about money, but really it's all about what I'm talking about. It's getting anything and everything that's heavy and old out of you. And that includes me hammering it, the traumas, and only at a pace that your system can handle. They'll be on medication, and then like a year in, they'll be like, or a year and a half of working with me, Dr. Allison, I'm off of my antidepressants. I have been for 3 months. I'm like, well, how come you never told me? I don't, on an intake form, I don't ask them about their meds, anymore, because I'm not working in the health field as much. It requires a lot more out of me to get
Mhm.
it once it becomes physicalized. If we get issues back in the mental, emotional state, or in the consciousness, the buried consciousness state, before it physicalizes into a physical health issue, it's easier and quicker. Depression is the transference from an emotional issue into the physical, because depression is physicalized. It's a heavier body, yeah, it's a slower moving body. Therapy is one of the reasons, honestly, that I left psychology. What I understand about energy from the quantum physics approach and from the traditional Chinese medical approach, which has been studying energy for 5,000 years, in traditional Chinese medicine, they have a saying that says, where qi goes, or vital life force energy, qi, or prana, as we say in yoga, or ki as in Reiki, vital life force energy, where it goes, blood follows. I add on to that, where our consciousness focuses, energy follows, and then the blood follows in these times now we're living in. So what that's implying is what quantum physics has taken 100 years to be able to accept, that it's our perception, that our energy, and then it's the physical. So everything at the subatomic level, at the under physicalized level, is a wave. And a repeated, I'm not saying one time, I'm saying repeated thought pattern collapses that wave into becoming physicalized, something physical, or a super intense emotional reaction like a trauma will collapse the wave, being in all potential and energy form, into a particle, physicalizing it. So everything is energy underneath matter, behind matter. And so when we tell our story over and over again in talk therapy, that's locking more and solidifying more your story into place. I don't find talk therapy helpful. But if you're in the initial stages of coming out of a trauma and you haven't had anybody to talk to, and you can get some free therapy, that's cool. So you can start the pathway. But I also don't want you to then feel like you're not having any movement forward or lightening, because that's not what talk therapy gets at. Anything that only deals with your intellect and talking, whether it's coaching or therapy, I have not stayed with, because it's not effective. You have to get to the energy. You have to get to beyond your daily thinking mind or your ego mind to move out of the old and into the new. People can come to me while they're getting therapy. A lot of people do. And then they eventually drop out of it because they no longer need it. It's the same with the medication, whether they let me know or not. If it's a psychological one, medication's different. You know, I'll have them work with their doctor on both of them, especially when they're on antidepressants of some sort, because those are really not at all appropriate to be pulling oneself off of. You need to do it with a doctor's guidance, because those are super sensitive. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Agree. So consult your physician. I wanted to ask you really quickly, because you talked about the energy and then it moving to the physical. When you were
Yeah.
in Taiwan and other areas where there was a lot more focus on our energy, are they a lot healthier than we are here physically?
That would be too sweeping of a statement. Um, because they have their own challenges, right? As they come into balance and we come into balance, where our weaknesses have been. But I will say there's way, like when I first heard, look at my posture, I'm like, I'm sorry. But when I first heard that they're now, like, it started about 3 years ago in Western Med, particularly in America. I don't know if they're doing it in the UK. Or I guess they're not, would be my guess. When the medications started to say, like, high blood pressure, to keep you from having high blood pressure, that they're preventative, I was horrified, because they were copying from the holistic field, which was in the supplements field, which was increasing market share in their market share, right? So they started in the allopathic medicine of pharmaceuticals to call them preventative. They're not. They create other things to have to deal with. So they are really, I found, and I was in Taiwan for the decade of the thousands, and they were really, globalizing was starting to happen, and westernizing was really in full blossom. Like, my dad came from the financial industry, and he was over there with mutual funds geared towards emerging markets. So that was all happening then. And I say that because I found that they were really hungry in the East for the Western ways that seemed more modernized, because they were sick of their grandparents' ancient wisdom. So as as soon as uh, I mean, there's one study I can think of because I have certification as a personal trainer too, and in fitness and I have supplements background in longevity, using supplements for longevity and super tonic herbs. And I worked with a nutritionist out of Cornell, and he was one of the first. He was the only nutritionist to sit on the first food pyramid with the FDA, and he was at the table with a bunch of cattle and dairy folks, and he realized, I'm the only one here about nutrition, and he left after this first one, the first food pyramid design. He went over to a part of China, a province where the most, no, I'm getting two studies confused. Hold on one second. That's about gynostemma tea, a longevity tea for people who live to over 100. The most 100-year-old centurions in a province in China drink gynostemma tea. There you go. Look it up. Dragon Herbs carries it. It's called spring dragon tea. To the other study that is relevant to what we're talking about, when it was a province that ate a lot of soy and a lot of vegetarian food, and they did a study introducing Western diet, typical American diet. And as soon as they adopted that, all the typical Western diseases came into play. All the markers started: the high blood pressure, the diabetes, and the cancer. So when people went over 12% of their daily diet consisting of protein, for example, the cancer markers started. So it's called The Protein Myth. It's a book, you can look it up. I had an interview with him on my radio show. So indirectly, I am saying when they get turned on to Western ways, the health dissipates. They do have, I covered this a lot in my What If There's Nothing Wrong, my first book. They do have a lot of awareness of preventative health. And in their awareness of energy, there's the practices of Qigong, again, which I teach. And then Tai Chi comes from that. All martial arts come from Qigong. So there's an understanding of energy. There's an understanding of working with the flow of energy. There's an understanding of monitoring their levels of stress, getting enough rest, managing themselves and their emotions. So yes, overall, there is more health, bottom line.
Love it. Love it. Well, we're going to take a quick turn here before I let you go. We are going to quickly talk about tattoos because I love tattoos. The audience loves tattoos. Normally you can see my tattoos, but we talked earlier with the hoodie and the cold weather. Now, I know that you don't have any tattoos. However, there was a point in time when you were close to getting one, and I would love to hear a little bit about that story.
All right, so I was backpacking around the planet, and I was living in the Mediterranean country for a month, picking peaches at what's called a mouchaf, making out with this really cool British bloke under the plum trees who picked potatoes. So in my early 20s, and had a great set of glutes because I had to walk up and down a ladder picking these peaches. And went into the tat studio and a couple of times, and a group of us were planning on getting them. And I was looking at, so this is in 93, and I was looking at above my hip getting a tattoo, and it was going to be a butterfly. I know that sounds ridiculously cheesy at this point. And when it came down to it, when I went there to get it, I backed out because I was like, I may not want this decades later in my life. This is where I'm at now, but I may not want this permanent thing in my body that I'm going to have to then deal with later. And I just didn't feel like doing it to my skin. Mind you, I'm always out in the sun. It's part of why I live in Florida. So, I mean, I'm happy to do that to my skin. The benefits there. So, yeah, but it's a different time now. Tats are glorious, and I love the sleeves when they're done well. And yeah, tats are really cool because when I learned, there's this crazy ass show in the UK. I lead retreats there where people go to get trained in Vibrational UPgrade System. They meet me, my students, my mastermind twice a year over there. So I'm there about a third of the year. There's a show on there called Naked Attraction. And so somebody will come on, and whether they're, bi or hetero or not proclaimed, they'll have a choice of that gender with which they want to sleep with in these different colored cubes. And they are all naked in those cubes, and they raise the bar up past the genitals for the first level, and that you have to delete make one go, and then they go up past the what would be breast for women area, seeing the abdomen, and then you kick off somebody else because you're not attracted to them. So now you're down to 4 people. Up comes the face, a couple more tests, and then they whittle it down to 2 people. And they have all this. I watch it, one, because it's, oh my God, they'd never show that on primetime TV in America, but also it has really interesting stats. And so one of the things that I learned was tattoos and their sexual attractive abilities have increased over the past decade, almost doubled, in that the Mayans used to consider tattoos a sign of sexual virility. So they used to use that in the Mayan days too, measured as your sexual desirability, having a tat, and it's coming back now.
I'm a big fan of this, and I've got to find this show now. So that
I know. I don't know if you will unless you're over there, because I don't know. It's probably clouded out if it's on YouTube at all. Anyway, naked attraction.
So any potential for a tattoo in the future?
Yeah, I'm open.
Right on. Awesome.
I'm looking right now at a portrait of the Queen that was created for her 70th Jubilee that I was there for this past summer before she passed. And the artist, it's a totally, I think for copyright reasons, I can't show you on the video. I would otherwise. It's only one of 195. And it's really like the anarchy in the UK kind of energetic to it. And she has a nose ring that's 3D, and it's glitz and bling, and a necklace of pearls, and the crown's glitz and bling. And it has a tat that the artist originally sent to the Queen, which she, for the approval before it went formal into a portrait of her, saying Philip. And before the Queen died, she said, "No, can you replace it with the lion and the Union Jack flag, please?" Because she didn't want a tat of her husband's name in this portrait of her. So yeah, tats they're in. They're fun.
Love it. I'm on the right side of this trend, so I'll take it. Dr. Alison, where can people find you? So if they want to talk to you about energy healing, vibrational upgrade system, or maybe they just want to have tea with you or talk about tattoos, where can they find you?
That's great, Claudia. So YouTube, Alison, 1L, middle name J, last name K. Same on Amazon, 4 books there, international #1 bestsellers. VibrationalUpgrade.com website, Vibrational Upgrade free Facebook group. That's good enough for now, yeah?
Sounds good. Dr. Alison, thank you so much for your time today. I truly appreciate it, and I know the audience will as well.
Cheers.
If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and follow us on social media so you'll never miss what's going on. Remember, until next week, you are strong enough, you are worth it. Thank you for listening to the Strong Enough podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform by searching Strong Enough. And on YouTube, we're on the Spear Talk channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Strong Enough Pod. If you have suggestions for an upcoming episode or a future guest, please reach out at strongenoughpod@gmail.com. Remember, you are worth it.